Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. We've begun with a conversation about the Atlantic 10 and NCAA sports, which are up in the air. As with everything else, we're anticipating baseball. We have news in sports over the last week, and for that, we'll have Kelly Bright join us with headlines. Kelly.
Yeah, unfortunately, Chris, we're kicking today's headlines off with some upsetting news that coming out of one of the most dysfunctional franchises in sports. 15 former female employees of the Washington football team have accused several members of the team's front office of sexual and verbal harassment spanning from 2006 to 2019. This is coming from a report published by the Washington Post Thursday night. Some of the people in the report, longtime radio voice and senior VP of content, Larry Michael, director of pro personnel, Alex Santos, and his assistant, Richard Mann. And obviously, Larry Michael abruptly retired from the organization earlier this week. Santos and Mann were both fired last Saturday. Owner Daniel Snyder and team president Bruce Allen were never directly accused of any of these offenses, but some of the women claimed it was unlikely that they were kept in the dark about this behavior. The NFL commented on the situation in a statement saying, quote, "These matters as reported are serious, disturbing, and contrary to the NFL's values. Everyone in the NFL has the right to work in an environment free from any and all forms of harassment. Washington has engaged outside counsel to conduct a thorough investigation into these allegations." And then they continue, "The club has pledged that it will give its full cooperation to the investigator, and we expect the club and all employees to do so. We will meet with the attorneys upon the conclusion of their investigation and take any action based on the findings." Now, Dan Snyder, he waited 18 hours after the report was originally published to respond, but in his statement, he says the behavior described in yesterday's Washington Post article has, quote, "no place in our franchise or society. The story has strengthened my commitment to setting a new culture and standard for our team, a process that began with the hiring of Coach Rivera earlier this year." Now, this is the second time in 2 years Washington's culture has been called into question. I don't know if you guys remember, but in 2018, there was an article from the New York Times in which the franchise was reported to be exploiting the team's cheerleaders during topless photo shoots and forcing them to attend after-hour events as escorts to male sponsors. And of course, like you talked about earlier in the show, this is all coming off the heels of the organization's decision to finally retire their longtime name and logo. So Chris, Andrew, obviously a lot to unpack here, but I'll start by asking this. How responsible do you think Snyder should be held in the situation? Is this enough to compel the league and the other owners to force him to sell the team?
Well, first of all, first of all, to the women who came forward, we applaud their courage, and we stand in solidarity with them. I have a big problem with Dan Snyder's response to this. The written letter doesn't strike me as filled with sincerity the way it ought to be, and it probably ought to be more of a press conference. He's completely responsible. There's no question about it. He owns the franchise. It all comes back to the top, and he is wholly and totally responsible and accountable. And I also find, I think it's in his last line about Coach Rivera. Ron Rivera is a head football coach. He hiring Ron Rivera is maybe good for the Washington football team as far as how many games they win this season. And I do believe that, of course, Ron Rivera can come in and change the culture to some extent, but to attribute that as a sort of Band-Aid solution, I mean, it feels like an excuse. It feels like a way of saying we've addressed this. We went out and hired Ron Rivera. You didn't hire Ron Rivera to fix problems with allegations of sexual assault. You hired Ron Rivera to win more football games. There's nothing wrong with hiring Ron Rivera for those reasons, but don't make this about somebody else. This is about one person. It's about Dan Snyder, and it's about the 15 women from the organization and 2 reporters who have flagged of course, their own instances of abuse, but in that, a culture that enabled it and allowed it.
And Chris, Kelly, the old saying goes, when it rains, it pours. And for the Washington football team right now, it's just pouring. They can't get out of their own way. they try to do something with the name change now, and now this comes to light. And to me, Daniel Snyder should be held fully accountable. I just don't understand his almost kind of just passive, I didn't know anything about it, just kind of excusing himself and then kind of coming out and saying, now we're going to strengthen the culture. And that starts with hiring Coach Rivera. But the fact of the matter is there's been a problem in the culture with this franchise for decades now. And it's just coming into light now. And it started with this name. And this name has always been racially offensive to Native Americans. But for Daniel Snyder, he went on the record and said that he'd never change it. But once it affected his bottom dollar and FedEx and Nike saying that they want to pull out, it just feels like Dan Snyder's being forced to do this. It's not genuinely coming from a good place from him. It's almost like a child who's being petulant and their parents tell them, well, no, you have to do this, no choice. And then the child's like, all right, I'll do it. And that's what it comes off to me. And for now, I don't think this is the thing that gets him out of ownership, but I feel like the steps have to be made where almost, I'm not going to say it's Donald Sterling-esque, but I think something has to happen where the NFL comes in and says, hey, we can't have you here. You are a bad representation of the league, the way you go about your business and what's happening under your watch, and try and bring in a new regime, a new ownership to really change the culture there in Washington.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, Dan Snyder's already such a polarizing figure. I mean, you had the scandal in 2018, which I mentioned earlier. I mean, he started charging people to come see the team camps, which originally were free. He's made so many questionable decisions. I mean, we could go on forever. And it seems like the people in Washington already want him out. And this, like you said, like when it rains, it pours. This is just so much worse. And a lot of the guys mentioned in the report were considered to be part of his inner circle. So it's like, how did you not know this was going on? I mean, from 2006 to 2019, that's a long time for this toxic environment to go on without you having any clue of it. And then to come out in these two statements, I mean, the one public statement and then, of course, the internal letter, both of them not really taking any responsibility, not really apologizing for what's happened, but instead just saying, oh, I've hired a new coach, so we're moving forward.
And Chris, I would add that the longtime play-by-play radio, I believe his name is, what is it, Richard Mann II, I believe?
Yeah.
Oh, no, excuse me, Larry Michael, excuse me. Richard Mann II is one of the other people who were fired. 3 guys were departed the organization within the week before this news dropped. So, I mean, really, these are guys who, as you mentioned, Kelly, are part of Snyder's inner circle and are supposed to be their, longtime friends. So it just strikes me as hard to believe that Daniel Snyder didn't know of things happening with people that he's closely associated to in the franchise.
And Dan Snyder's had a long-standing reputation, and these reputations don't come from nothing. We've been hearing rumblings about Dan Snyder forever. It's not a coincidence either that these rumblings haven't become substantive accusations, because powerful people have ways of shielding themselves. And Dan Snyder is not directly implicated in these allegations. It's more people in his inner circle, and you have to ask yourself the question, at the very best, he is complicit by having not rooted out this culture. But there's no reason that we shouldn't be sitting here doubting the behavior of Dan Snyder. I mean, his complicity would indicate that he also had the potential to, and again, we don't have these solid accusations to stand on, but that's a theme with powerful people who can find a way to do that. And a guy who, by all intents and purposes, is not known by anyone in the industry to be a good guy, and we don't know him, but what we know also is that his racial slur of a team nickname, he has not had any courage in that fight. I mean, he's resisted that. He's constantly claimed his right to keep this franchise's name. And as one of you mentioned, it took until FedEx, the sponsor of the team's stadium, to say, we're not going to put up with this, for him to do something about it. So here's a guy who is not really the most morally clear guy. And these are the type of people in sports that we need to root out systemically, because let's face it, there's a systemic problem in sports. This is not This is not just cultural with the Washington football franchise. This is across sports, and we have been hearing outspoken women reporters, people in sports media and industry, talking about how this is not a culture that is always accepting or easy for women to break into. And so we need to be having these conversations. We need to break down these walls. And this is an area where you have a clear example of where the culture has gone wrong.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, the culture stems from the owner. Like saying, I know, Chris, you just mentioned, saying that hiring Ron Rivera is supposed to fix this. Like, Ron Rivera, first of all, he's coming from the Carolina Panthers organization, which also had a scandal of sexual harassment where the owner was forced to sell the team. Obviously, in this situation, Dan Snyder not directly accused of anything, but still, at the end of the day, if you're an owner of a franchise, you're responsible for the culture of that program. And clearly, for all the things that were mentioned in the report, it just seems like it's an entire company-wide toxic environment. And I don't think it's going to start just from the head football coach, whose main job in the organization is to coach a football team, not deal with a lacking HR system or executives who haven't learned how to respect their fellow employees. So I really think it does need to stem from him, and I hope that somehow he finds a way to like start finding ways to change the culture in his program. I mean, he has finally, like you said, he's now agreeing to retire the old logo and name, but I mean that took forever. That took how long? How many complaints for him to finally change that? So hopefully this is a wake up call for him. But I mean, we'll just have to see.
We don't want to leave that conversation there because it's a conversation that needs to be continuous and constant. And we're all in gratitude of 15 women and the 2 female reporters who had the courage to open up to the Washington Post and allow us to have this conversation on the air. And I've been hearing it on the air all week, and I think it's critical. It comes on the heels of other difficult conversations that we've been having about Black Lives Matter. And so these things are intersecting with our sports with each and every day. And, I think that is a critical thing. And yeah, I'll give you the last word, Kelly, and then we can move to some of our other less upsetting topics.
Yeah, I'll just make one final. I mean, as a woman in sports who like hopes to one day work in the professional sports industry, I know I talked about this a little bit on my personal Twitter, but one of the most heartbreaking lines in that report was one woman saying that this has killed any dream she had of working in the professional sports. And I think that's just something we really need to try to avoid. Like, no person, regardless of gender, race, sexual orientation, religion, whatever, should feel like they can't pursue their professional career goals because they're afraid they're going to be harassed. So I think this goes beyond just this one instance. This goes beyond just this one organization. Like you said, we've been already fighting social justice with this Black Lives Matter movement and everything. So I'm hoping that this is all pushing towards a more positive direction.